I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about the Blockbuster jobs report, Islamic terror at Pensacola. The IG report came out today, and it's pretty good for us. And last, Ukraine impeachment and Senator Lindsay Graham. And I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
I am America, one voice, united we stand.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth.
Hello again, and welcome to America Can We Talk, and to today's First Five. I'm Debbie Georgatos. Last week, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Standards came out with their jobs numbers. And the First Five today, all I want to point out is how wonderfully the economy is performing and how much it seems to upset leftists in this country who do not like the proof right in front of them that actually free market policies work wonders. Quickly on the numbers, again, this was the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics pointing out all the new jobs created under the Trump administration. And it's not Trump personally, it's free market policies. It's policies that encourage job growth because they encourage the growth of businesses. So employment far above expectations, a bump in median earnings. So it's not just that the left is always trying to claim, oh yeah, things are only great for big corporations and wealthy people. 266,000 net new jobs. November was the nation's 10th straight month for job gains. Labor Department also made upward revisions to numbers from September and October because the economy is performing so well. Strong job market gets more people back into looking for employment. So it's just been all great thing. These gains are broad and deep. Minorities in America continue to see record or near record low unemployment rates. Blacks at 5.5%, Hispanics at 4.2%. And recent research from Bloomberg News shows that the Trump era recovery has most benefited. Okay, got to pay attention to this part. The Trump era recovery has most benefited those people, the 40%, the lowest 40% of income earners in America. Now, you would think that that could make pretty much everyone happy in America because we love when there is a great job market, when we have jobs available and people working and stimulating the beautiful free market economy in America. But as you might have expected, I just only have two quotes to share with you. I could share dozens more. One was New York Representative, U.S. Member of Congress, Representative Carolyn Maloney, top Democrat in Congress's Joint Economic Committee. You know, she had to say, well, okay, those numbers are kind of good, mumble, mumble, but she says remarkable resilience in the face of the president's increasingly erratic trade policies, not giving credit to the idea maybe the trade policy changes helped. But she also goes on to say, and let's not forget that Americans in many communities and parts of society still find it hard to get a well-paying job. And Speaker Pelosi weighed in with a similarly obnoxious comment, basically just saying, oh, yeah, good numbers, but, you know, we have better things to do. Democrats are going to do more things for you. We're going to pass prescription drug price controls. And so I want to close out the First Five. I don't want to make it a long First Five, Jay, because the stories out of Washington today are huge. The Inspector General report is a huge thing we must talk about. The Islamic terror in Pensacola and how we're dealing with that. I want to close out the First Five by saying this. The reason that you cannot get more people in the American left celebrating the beauty of a robust economy with more people working, people contributing to the American economy, what you're supposed to be doing in a free market country, in a capitalist country, where you find a job that produces a good or service somebody else wants, and all the economy benefits from this. The reason leftists cannot stand to give adequate credit to these job numbers, to the across the board fabulous numbers in our economy, is because what President Trump is really doing is proving to the American people who've been duped by the left for so long, President Trump is proving to the American people that freedom actually works, that free markets work, that keeping government, cutting regulation, cutting tax rates, bringing jobs back to America, inspiring Americans to believe in themselves, in their ability to participate in this free market economy. Trump is proving all of that to the American people, and this is the exact opposite of the policies the American left supports. Now, I would say at some point in our history, Republicans, Democrats might have kind of most agreed with that idea. Maybe I'm saying most Republicans and Democrats probably would have said, well, sure, we love a great economy. We love seeing people working. The reason they can't stand to say that right now is because the formerly, one of the two mainstream parties, the Democrat Party, has been taken over in its ideology by leftists in this country, by socialist-minded people who truly live and move, who are dedicated in their policies, in their speeches, in their legislative efforts to having the federal government take more and more and more control of the economy into the hands of the bureaucrats in Washington, of the members of Congress in Washington, and taking that, just slowly chipping away at. Like, when they talk about an axe hitting a tree and finally knocking it over, slowly chipping away at not only the free market economy and the beauty of capitalism and freedom, but chipping away at the American people's belief that capitalism and freedom can work. But this is what President Trump is proving to the American people can work. And this is why the leftists I just mentioned and many others in this country can barely stand to give credit to the idea that we have a great and robust economy because we have a reintroduction, a reinvigoration of free market principles. And that, my friends, is today's First Five. I want to turn out, and we obviously all watched the news last week, this horrific Islamic terror attack at the naval base in Pensacola. I want to, I guess, just take a moment and show you the picture of the gentleman who engaged in this conduct this is the Pensacola Naval Base. That guy is the shooter, the deadly shooter. His name is Mohammed al-Sham, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it correctly, Mohammed al-Shamrani. Mohammed al-Shamrani. He is a Saudi national, meaning he's a Saudi Arabian citizen. He was here in America training at Pensacola Naval Base, training to become a pilot. And he decided to open fire on that naval base and ended up killing 3 people. And, I was going to go through the stories of those 3 people. I mean, these were young, sweet, young men, patriots in this country, people who volunteer to serve in our military. I will at least tell you their names. One of them was actually okay, I can't tell you the names quickly. It's the wrong sheet of paper. I have their names in here. Anyway, 3 young men. One of them very recently out of training and all excited told his parents, yeah, I'm going to go and I'm going to help stand guard at the Pensacola Naval Air Station. And so instead he is shot to death. Heroes involved, as there always are in these kind of situations. And I want to just comment on a couple aspects of this story. Number one, this guy who did the shooting, who was, fortunately, or I always think it's fortunate, was killed, so he's no longer with us. But his allies, one of them was apparently filming the attack. One of his other fellow Saudi nationals filming this attack on innocent Americans serving at Pensacola Naval Base. They had the previous night, he and some other buddies had gotten together to watch videos. Again, Saudi nationals who are being trained on our military bases using our facilities and our trainers and our information, sat around and watching videos about massive terror attacks. I mean, that's like entertainment, I guess, to them. Watching videos, pumping themselves up. And these are people who had, apparently some among this group involved, had actually traveled to New York City to watch the lighting of the big Christmas tree in New York City, the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree, this American tradition that so many families think about doing if they live in the East Coast. Maybe we should go to New York City. And I want to again point out a couple of things, and there are many points I want to make about this story as it relates to security in America. Number one, this guy had been here at least since 2017, the shooter, this murderer, this Islamic jihadist murderer. He had been here long enough to see the nobility of the American military, to receive the benefit of American military training, to travel to New York City to see our Rockefeller Center and the whole beauty of New York City's, celebration of Christmas. He had been around American soldiers who had, I'm sure, welcomed him, helped him, trained him, helped him learn what he's supposed to be here to learn. And so he's seen enough of American culture to appreciate that even if he grew up in a Muslim community in Saudi Arabia that was profoundly anti-American, profoundly Western civilization, profoundly anti-Christian, profoundly pro-jihadist. Even if he grew up in that environment, he'd had 2 years here to see what America's like, to see really good, noble people serving in the military. But even those 2 years here, even being getting the benefit of American tax dollars paid to help train him to be a pilot, that goodness of America, that window he had in the goodness of America, was not enough to overcome what he had learned at home in Saudi Arabia, growing up in a Muslim-majority country, a Sharia-compliant country, and in fact, Saudi Arabia is the home of Wahhabi Islam, the most radical, evil, deadly, horrific form of Islam. That's where he grew up. That's what he learned going to school, the way people are taught in Islamic countries to respect the idea of Islam having as a core teaching, and Islam has as a core teaching in the Quran, out of the mouth of Muhammad, taught by imams all around this world, taught in Islamic schools and the madrasas, taught in Islamic universities, that the core duty of a devout Muslim is to spread Islam. It's not the duty to, like Christians may think, I'd like to, in an evangelical outreach, share my Christian faith and invite you to come to church on Sunday. It is a duty, it's a core of Islam that says devout Muslims must seek to foist Islam on the world, ultimately to bring the world into submission to Islam. So, this young man here in America for 2 years decides to shoot up a naval base. I want to hit a bunch of points about him. The FBI, at least this time, they first tried to say they weren't too sure about the cause. They came out pretty quickly saying, looks like it was terrorism. The Saudis have, to their attempt to credit themselves, the Saudis have launched an investigation about whether the Pensacola shooter, this is the Saudis' words, was this Pensacola Saudi national Muslim shooter who killed 3 innocent Americans, was he radicalized on a recent trip home? He'd gone back to Saudi Arabia, I think it was the end of 2018, whatever it was. He went back, and so they're trying to say, oh yeah, well, we'll do an investigation, we'll try to figure this out. We'll try to figure out whether he got radicalized on this recent trip. People, many Muslims are innocent and do not commit jihad. Many Muslims do not commit jihad. But the argument America has to have is not with each individual Muslim. It is the question of, can we come to terms with, can we connect the dots, can we deal with the reality that Islam itself, the religion, the faith, its leaders around the world encourage devout Muslims to engage in jihad for the purpose of bringing the rest of the world into submission of Islam, into submission to Islam. Once we get that fact straight, we can then adjust how we think about programs like bringing Saudi military people and letting them be on American military bases. We could reassess that. We could say, you know what, it's not enough that, he's got a pretty good track record and he hasn't been arrested yet in Saudi Arabia, and he hasn't, so far committed any crimes. We need to understand, what do you think, buddy, about the idea of the founding teachings of Islam? Do you understand that in America, we don't do jihad. We don't do Sharia. You're coming here to benefit from us. We have to be far more careful in how we vet people we're willing to permit to come to our country. And as far as the military bases go, we had Fort Hood happen right here in the great state of Texas. We should have at that time decided, we have to be really careful about who we bring to America. Now, I realize the Fort Hood shooter was an American citizen. But the idea, we've seen this play before, been there, done that. We know this story. We need to be protective of our own military and our military bases enough so that we are not bringing people to those bases who mean people harm. And if we aren't sure if they mean them harm, why don't we train them somewhere else? We don't have to bring them here. But so this whole idea of the Pensacola shooter, and Saudi Arabia is trying to help out by saying, hey, we're going to find out how he was radicalized. How about because he was probably taught in an Islamic school? How about because he was a devout Muslim? That would be one reason. And also, I want to, there was just several aspects of the story I want to be sure and cover. There were other people arrested by the authorities after the shooting happened. I think it's 5 or 6 other Muslim members of the Saudi military serving at the Pensacola Naval Base. There are also people missing from that base, Saudi military people missing from that base. We're now looking for unaccounted Saudi nationals following the Pensacola shooting. And we have we have these, they're called students, they're here being students to learn from our military. But the idea that we don't know where they are, at least the FBI is agreeing we got to find them, but we've got to be smarter in our country about this idea that we don't have to. We can have Saudi Arabia as an ally. I mean, to a certain degree, they are they're our main Muslim country ally, along with probably Egypt. Egypt is kind of more of an ally. But we don't have to be stupid. We don't have to continue bringing people to America who may mean us harm. We don't have to agree because the Saudi military would like to have some of their people trained in America that we have to do it here. We have to have a better vetting process, and in the interim, we need to stop bringing them here. Stop bringing Saudi military people to American military bases, because we should have by now figured out that they actually, many of them, can mean us harm. So it was 6 Saudis that were arrested, and then there were the others who are being sought in a massive manhunt. One last thing on this story, along with the idea about Islamization. We have in this country the idea of Islamization is both that as a form of jihad. Some Muslims following the command in Islam to commit jihad, commit violent jihad, as we've seen all over Western Europe, we've seen all over the world, Northern Africa, all over the world. But some commit jihad in a cultural way. It's cultural jihad or civilizational jihad. So they spread Islam not by engaging in a violent attack, but instead by engaging in manipulation of the culture, manipulation of the people in the country that is welcoming them, slow pressure on that country to change its laws to at least accommodate Islam, and then to give Islam a preference, and then to agree that Islam must never be criticized in the media. So, getting around to say in Twitter and social media, Pete Hegseth, the great Fox News personality, and he's a fabulous guy, he posted on his Twitter account a screen grab of the tweet put out by this jihadist who committed the killing at Pensacola. The jihadist from Pensacola, who is deceased, thank goodness, but he had tweeted out a few hours before he engaged in this mass violent attack at the naval base, tweeted out about how much he hates America and how evil America is, and America's wrong and they're evil and blah, 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 and just on and on attacking America. And if he hates us so much, why does he even come here? But he posted that attack. Pete Hegseth screen grabbed and put that attack up on his, Pete Hegseth's, Twitter feed to say, this is what this guy said. Now, of course, right away after the guy committed this act, this horrific violent attack, Twitter quick pulls down his Twitter feed. We can't have people thinking there's some connection between, this jihadist attack and the teachings of Islam. Can't have that. So they pulled down his Twitter account, the killer's Twitter account, and then Pete Hegseth had a screen grab of this particular tweet that attacked America and said how much he hates America, and Twitter they banned Pete Hegseth. They took him off of Twitter because he said, he'll be back on, but the point is, Twitter playing along with that Islamization mission of manipulating culture, manipulating media, manipulating politicians, manipulating police, manipulating the host culture to where you can't connect dots between the teachings of Islam and the conduct of Islamic jihadists. You're not supposed to do that. You can't connect those dots. You must pretend you have absolutely no idea why this guy might have done this, and you're going to look for where he got radicalized. But by golly, we cannot possibly have blame cast at the source of what motivated this guy to engage in this conduct. So, my heart's broken for the families of those young men, 3 young men who lost their lives at Pensacola last week, and the idea that we are living in a culture where we can't figure out, maybe we shouldn't be bringing Saudi military people here and let them have access to our military bases. Maybe this is not wise. I'm sure we can think of another way to help them without bringing their... But in the meantime, and there was one good comment, and I actually think it was from the governor of Florida. I can't remember, I don't have it in front of me. But actually there were two good comments. One from the Florida governor just kind of saying, you know, we got to look into this, you know, why these people are coming here. But we also had Secretary of Defense Mark Esper said the Pentagon plans to review the screening process for foreign students after the deadly shooting at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola. So at least we're going to look at the question, why is it? What do we screen? What do we look for? How do we figure out who we're okaying to bring to this country and allow access to America's military bases and ultimately permit them to end up in a situation where we are, where three precious young American patriots lost their lives, all of them heroically, because that we had a guy on the military base, allowed on the military base, who obviously did not, who meant America harm. And that is a story in Pensacola. So the next story I want to hit, the IG report came out today. And I want to say a couple of preparatory remarks before I get into it. But the IG report is the Inspector General report. It is put out, is a federal law that created an Inspector General's office in many federal agencies. So many agencies have these. Their job, they are not directly employed by the agency. They're independent. And their job is to oversee, watch and make sure that federal law is being followed. Just be a check and balance on these behemoth, massive federal agencies. So we had an Inspector General report issued related to, and I want to just tell you what it's actually related to, because there are so many controversies going on in Washington that I kind of want to distinguish and make clear we know what we're talking about. So the Inspector General, this is for the Inspector General for the Department of Justice. So the only things he can look into are things that directly involve the Department of Justice and the FBI, which is under the Department of Justice. So he can look into decisions, actions, statements, failure to act of people in the DOJ and the FBI, and he can then determine, or he makes a determination, did those actions in any way violate federal law or federal regulation? So that's what his job was. He did not look into it, no involvement in looking into anything related to Hillary Clinton and her email server, anything related to Hillary Clinton and the pay-for-play thing that went on as she was Secretary of State. He had nothing to do with, no statutory or jurisdictional authority to look into whatever it was John Brennan was doing over at the CIA, stirring up his own, hornet's nest over there at the CIA, apparently setting in motion the whole Trump-Russia collusion hoax. Horowitz did not have any authority or jurisdiction to talk to people in anyone outside FBI and DOJ, so nobody over there at the CIA. So his jurisdictional authority was to look into the decision to open the FBI investigation on July 31st of 2016. So he's looking into the question of whether or not the FBI investigation that began of President Trump and the whole Trump-Russia collusion hoax. It began July 2016. Trump wasn't even elected yet, but they had started Crossfire Hurricane. He looked into that. He looked into the 4 individual cases on current and former members of the Trump campaign: Papadopoulos, Page, Manafort, and Flynn. He looked into the FBI's relationship. So that was number 1. Number 2, and the FBI's relationship with Christopher Steele, the fiction writer who came up with, actually he had co-authors, but he came up with the Steele dossier. So you have Christopher Steele, the whole Russian Steele dossier, completely either debunked or conspiratorially written and never proven. I mean, just a bunch of garbage. But anyway, so he had to look into Christopher Steele, whom the FBI considered to be a CHS, confidential human source. Number 3, he had to look into the 4 FBI applications before the FISA court. You realize the FISA court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, is what the FBI had to go to get warrants issued by the FISA court so they could continue what they had already been doing, which is spying on Trump affiliates. So the 4 FISA court applications, the report deals with that. the report also deals with the interactions between, he really hones in on the DOJ attorney Bruce Orr, O-H-R Orr. He hones in on Orr and Bruce Orr's relationship with Christopher Steele, with the FBI, with Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS, and the State Department. And basically, whether Orr's relationship with his wife, who was with Fusion GPS, implicated ethical rules. So a lot about Bruce Orr in there. And then also the FBI's use of undercover employees and these CHs, confidential human sources, other than Steele, who were used to try to get a headway into the Trump campaign. So that was his jurisdiction. And again, to be clear, the IG report has nothing to do with the Ukrainian issue that is now the basis of the impeachment effort. So this is what the IG report is. Now I will tell you, just to have all those parameters straight, that's what you're supposed to be doing. So the biggest conclusion, and the thing I want to hit now and at the end of this segment, is this. This Inspector General report finds numerous ways in which the FBI failed to follow its own policies, failed to act in an ethical way, misled the FISA court. There's a series of things he listed in his report where the FBI was out of bounds. But a core finding he made, and the reason it's so important it is, I'll tell you in a second what it is. So a core finding in the IG report is his conclusion that even though all these other things that people in the FBI and DOJ did were unlawful and bad and unethical and misleading, he found there was basically, at the very beginning, the genesis, the predicate of the Russia probe was legally justified. And this is a huge issue. We're going to talk about it more at the end. A huge issue, because he's saying, despite all of these evidences of wrongdoing and bias and failure to follow and misleading the FISA court, he still says he finds no reason to question whether the Russia probe was legally justified. I want to contrast what he said, because as soon as this came out, you had, so this is the Inspector General report. The second thing that will be coming out, hopefully soon, on the Mueller, Trump-Russia collusion hoax, will be the results of the large investigation being done within the Department of Justice, Attorney General Barr, U.S. Attorney Barr, Attorney General Barr, and also this U.S. Attorney John Durham. Durham is heading up the investigation to get the very question, was there a legitimate basis for the FBI to even have started this whole Trump-Russia collusion hoax? Was there a legal basis? And so, when this report came out today, Horowitz's report comes out, two statements. I want to read both of them because they really, really matter. One is from Attorney General Barr, realizing that the IG report says there was no problem with the launching, no ethical problem with the launching of the Trump-Russia collusion hoax investigation. Here's what Barr says. The Inspector General's report now makes clear that the FBI launched an intrusive investigation of a U.S. presidential candidate on the thinnest of suspicions that, in my view, were insufficient to justify the steps taken. So Barr is publicly disagreeing with the Inspector General, Horowitz, and saying, you know what, there was no basis to do this. He's disagreeing with the conclusion the IG says is that, that launching the investigation was justified. And so Barr is way deep in it, far deeper in it than this Inspector General can ever be, because of the limitations of his jurisdiction that I mentioned at the outset. The other statement made today also by in response to the IG report is the U.S. Attorney John Durham. Here's what he had to say, and he's the one digging in. Allegedly, he's in front of some grand juries, maybe even working to bring indictments about this concoction of a Trump-Russia collusion hoax, also known as a coup. But here's what John Durham had to say. Based on the evidence collected to date, and while our investigation is ongoing, last month we advised the IG that we do not agree with some of the report's conclusions as to the predication and how the FBI case was opened. So he's saying, Barr and Durham are both saying, the Inspector General is wrong. I mean, they're refusing to agree with his conclusion that the opening of the entire case was justified. So beside that, the IG report, I mean, you had Democrats out right away saying, see, you know, all of this was just conspiracy theory. No one did anything wrong. Everything's fine. You know, Trump was the bad guy, and, you know, he deserved this, and the IG report bears it out. But the IG report doesn't bear that out at all. They found, I'm going to just give you some of the examples they found. A huge one to understand is they went to the FISA court to get warrants to, you know, to use Trump's word, wiretap, but to continue spying on Trump officials. And they did that. So they go to the FISA court to get this warrant, and they're required by law, because they're going to get an extraordinary warrant against an American citizen. They're required to spell out in this application the veracity, the basis for believing in the entire Steele dossier, which should have been nothing, which was basically nothing. They skated over that. But the big and specific thing is they're required, if they're trying to characterize, as they were, trying to characterize Carter Page as probably a wrongdoer, possibly a wrongdoer, got a spy on him, and they did not include in their application the exculpatory information, the other side of the story. They put only the facts in that application to the FISA court that made Carter Page look bad, left out the details about him that made him look ethical and good, and in fact probably would have caused the FISA court to say, you're spying on this guy, it's ridiculous. So they left out key information, and they just cannot get away with arguing to the American people that it was mistaken. We didn't really mean to do that. Look at that. We kind of screwed up. So it was described as the IG report was describing that the FBI wiretap on Trump's campaign was riddled with errors, filled with errors. 17 separate inaccuracies across 3 surveillance applications, inflating the justification for monitoring Carter Page. I mean, it struck me driving here today, by the way, I was thinking about this. So Horowitz goes through, this is Michael Horowitz, the IG, the Inspector General for the DOJ. He goes through, they did this wrong, and this wrong, and this wrong, and this wrong, and this wrong. List all these things. These aren't like, you know, forgot to put a comma in a sentence. They're wrongdoing. But he says, but at the end, there's nothing wrong with this. I see no reason for them to question why they launched a Trump-Russia collusion hoax. It struck me as how similar that was to what FBI Chief Comey, Director Comey, did when he gave that big statement over July 4th week about Hillary Clinton, and he acknowledged she broke this law and this law and this law and this law, and she lied and she twisted. And we see no reason to think there's a problem here. In fact, he vindicated her in his FBI report. So he's kind of telling the Attorney General at the time, you know, she's fine, leave her alone, she's fine, don't prosecute her. It's the same kind of attitude that Comey had that Horowitz is exhibiting here. I think Comey had more reason to do that, but it's the same attitude. One last point on this, and then I want to turn to the last story of the day, but there's a new... and by the way, all the stories I'm talking about, all the detail, you can always get by going to my website, americacanwetalk.org. On the homepage, under shows, drop down, list of links. All these stories are in there. You can read them yourself. I go out of my way, read them yourselves. I go out of my way to make the data that I read available to you so you can understand it, you can study it yourself, and tell your friends about it. One last point I was going to make about this part of the show today is there's a new argument emerging among leftists in this country, and it is the idea that kind of no matter what happened, what was the intent? And this is what Hillary got exonerated on, because FBI Comey said, Director Comey said, she didn't have intent. She didn't intend to do anything wrong. She didn't intend anything. So the fact that she broke federal laws that have no element of intent required to prove in order to prosecute, so what? This is kind of a leftist, how to excuse the bad guys. You know, we got to let this go because after all, there was no intent. So this is being used again in this case. And I want to tell you how insidious it is, and I'm going to loop back to what I was saying at the start of this segment about how Barr and Durham have weighed in disagreement with the Horowitz conclusion that everything was fine. There was no foul play in the launch of the FBI investigation into Trump and Russia. Suppose you were an FBI attorney or an FBI agent, and you truly, in your heart of hearts, with no doubt whatsoever in your thinking, truly deeply thought President Trump or candidate Trump is dangerous and we don't like him and he'd be scary as president, or I have a gut feel that President Trump probably did something wrong with the Russians, and so even though I can't put my finger on it, I can't prove it, I'm going to go gangbusters to figure it out. So I kind of, bend the rules a little bit. I ignore the standards that justify wiretaps. I ignore the rules about what I have to include in the FISA report. If I really, really thought that Trump was a bad guy, would be a terrible president, or he probably did something with the Russians, I just can't prove it, I just can't find it. And so you didn't have in your heart the idea of wanting to commit a coup, wanting to take the president down. All you really had was a genuine feeling in your heart, this is a bad guy, and I don't like him, and I'm going to find a way, and if I have to bend the rules, so what? The question for Attorney General Barr and Durham is, does that amount to being prosecutable? If they broke the law, they wouldn't have said, or some of them will say, there was no organized coup inside the FBI. We didn't all, have secret late night meetings and plan the coup. We actually believe what we were doing. We believed we were right. And so we cut a few corners. We ignored a few rules. We were right. We had a good motivation. We were trying to save America. And the answer, my friends, is this. You cannot vindicate. You cannot agree that if you intended to do what you thought was the best thing, and you have the power of the FBI and the Department of Justice to ruin people's lives, to launch investigations, to make false accusations, to force people to give you statements under oath, to bring the entire power of the federal government down on someone, you cannot forgive, vindicate, or in any way excuse their corner cutting, their regulation ignoring, their failure to follow procedures simply because they meant well or they thought they were right. It makes no difference at all what they thought. Now, at the very top, the people who were, and I think this was a coup, I think this is John Brennan orchestrated. We're not going to, this is my opinion, John Brennan orchestrated, we're not going to let this guy become president. We're going to do something about it. We're going to get him somehow. Those people, they did commit, if what I believe is accurate, they did commit a coup. The lower level people, though, the idea that they say, well, we thought we were right, it cannot even be giving an iota of weight in the assessment of this situation. And this is what Barr and Durham realize. These people in Washington who did this, not just one time a slight failure to, construct a sentence correctly, or one time a slightly misleading statement to the FISA court. This was on and on and on and on for months. These are people who sworn to uphold the Constitution. They have no right to cut corners, ignore rules, cook up a prosecution, perpetuate the FISA warrant applications to continue spying on someone because they have a creepy feeling that they don't like him. They don't have that right. They must be held accountable to the highest extent of the law. But the big difference, I think, between Horowitz over here and the IG and Barr and Durham is Barr and Durham have a lot more information than the IG could ever have, could have. And so they know more about people outside of the FBI and the DOJ. They know more about the Brennan team and what they were doing and Brennan's assets around the world. They know a lot more. And they are unwilling, I am reading into their statements I read to you, they're unwilling to concede that, well, if the intent was innocent, they had innocent intent, they didn't mean to do anything wrong, they really thought, they believed what they were doing was right. I think that Horowitz, who works for, the DOJ, and he is, he's got to see these people that he is going to criticize wrongdoing. He's not going to do it. He'd rather preserve the institution, call out, failures of failure to follow procedures, policies, regulations, and view it as something to be fixed for next time. But Barr and Durham have a deeper obligation, and I believe they understand that, which is to get to the bottom of this completely hoax Russia-Trump collusion, point out who cooked it up, point out who helped, point out the mission, point out the illegality, and bring indictments. Last story for today, and I'll make this very quick, because actually it really is kind of quick. This is about the Ukraine, which is actually, the entire reason we are looking at impeachment today involves the Ukraine. And I want to just play the quickest of clips. The very quick thing on this, so again, the Barr, Durham, Horowitz, nothing to do with the Ukraine. This is all about, the impeachment of Trump is all about the conversation between Trump and Zelensky in July of this year, Ukrainian President Zelensky, July of this year, which the leftists in this country are trying to claim constituted some kind of quid pro quo or bribery or something evil, ignoring the overwhelming evidence of what Biden did and bragged about in a televised appearance at the Council on Foreign Relations. But this is what you have to go through. I want to give kudos to Ted Cruz, U.S. Senator from Texas. First of all, he's a great man, but U.S. Senator Ted Cruz had to go in this hideous interview. And I want to just quick play this interview segment, and so you can hear what he has to put up with, as he basically was coming to President Trump's defense and saying, of course, President Trump has the right to try to figure out, get to the bottom of what happened inside the Ukraine involving American officials. Take it away, Ted.
Do you believe Ukraine meddled in the American election in 2016?
I do, and I think there's considerable evidence.
You do? You do?
Yes,
Look,
and Chuck, let me say.
This is, Senator, this sort of strikes me as odd, because you went through a primary campaign with this president. He launched a birtherism campaign against you. He went after your faith. He threatened to, quote, spill the beans about your wife about something. He pushed a National Enquirer story, which we now know he had a real relationship
Chuck,
with the editors
your
of the National
dragging
Enquirer.
up all that garbage.
Senator,
That's very kind of you.
Let me ask you this. Is it not possible that this president is capable of creating a false narrative about somebody in order to help him politically?
Except that's not what happened. The president released the transcript of the phone call. You can read what was said on the phone call.
Yeah, and the Bidens,
let me point out again,
you yourself thought the Biden part was troubling.
Chuck, let me point out a game that the media is playing. A question that you've asked a number of people is you've said to senators sort of aghast, do you believe that Ukraine and not Russia interfered in the election? Now that in a court of law would be struck as a misleading question. Of course Russia interfered in our election. Nobody looking at the evidence disputes that.
The president of the United States does.
Look, on the evidence, Russia clearly interfered in our election. But here's the game the media is playing. Because Russia interfered, the media pretends nobody else did. Ukraine blatantly interfered in our election. The sitting ambassador from Ukraine wrote an op-ed blasting Donald Trump during the election season.
Do you know why he did that?
That is unusual.
What did Donald Trump as a candidate say about Ukraine and Crimea during the election that might have inspired the ambassador?
So you're saying they had disagreements with Donald Trump and they wanted Hillary Clinton to get elected.
Okay, I love Ted got that line in. Okay, love Ted Cruz. I want to make a couple of very, very serious points about where we are on this impeachment thing, because it really, really matters to watch what the Democrats are doing. Number one, can you imagine anything more hideous than being at the receiving end of an interview with Chuck Todd? I mean, belligerent, asinine, bringing up irrelevant things, trying to goad Ted Cruz because President Trump, during the course of the campaign, he was really brutal toward Ted Cruz. I did not appreciate it during the campaign. I thought it was unjustified. But here we are talking about the impeachment of the president. Ted Cruz is coming to President Trump's defense and saying, of course he can look into what what happened in the Ukraine. But anyway, first point is just belligerence of a guy like Chuck Todd. I cannot understand how anyone can stand to watch a show like that, because there was no intelligent discussion going on the part of Chuck Todd. Just a belligerent, relentless obnoxiousness. But what I want to hit in wrapping up today and talking about the Ukraine, the impeachment, is this. There was an interview over the weekend by Senator Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham, Republican senator, went on Maria Bartiromo and her Fox show Sunday morning. And he actually said on Maria Bartiromo's show, he said that the conservatives, are not his words, these are a characterization of his words. Conservatives desire their dreams of a Senate trial threw a wet blanket on them that would get to the bottom of the plot against President Trump. He wants to leave. This is this guy characterizing what Senator Lindsey Graham has said. We're not going to dig up, we're not going to dig up all the details about the Ukrainian collusion, the Ukrainian efforts in 2016 to help Hillary get elected, the Ukrainian efforts to, funnel money to Burisma and Joe Biden. We're not going to dig all that up. He wants to not dig that up, Lindsey Graham. He also wants to not dig up anything about the Trump, Mueller, Russia collusion lie. And on that one, there may be something in the impeachment that refers to Trump and Russia, which would give the Senate jurisdiction to do that. Because the Senate can hold a trial and look into any aspect of the impeachment report. So the more garbage the House Democrats throw in the impeachment report, the more the Senate can go after it. But Lindsey Graham went out of his way to make the point on Maria Bartiromo this weekend that he is not going to permit in the Senate trial a bunch of rocks to be uncovered. He just simply doesn't want to. In fact, he ruled out calling out Adam Schiff, who is in the thick of things with the alleged whistleblower. He's in the thick of things with cooking up this whole Ukraine-Trump thing. And Lindsey Graham is saying, I'll have none of it. I'm going to close out the show today with this point and then turn to why it matters to you. So there is a story starting to surface. The One America News Network dove in and researched and was able to finally interview a guy from the Ukraine. This is a One America News journalist called Chanel Ryan. She tracked down and recorded an interview with Ukrainian former prosecutor general Yuri Lutsenko. Yuri Lutsenko, former prosecutor, who told her on a tape that you can watch, essentially, that the U.S. ambassador, who just testified in the impeachment trial on the Ukraine stuff, perjured herself. He also talked about a major ongoing corruption within the Ukraine, protected by people in America, money funneling. This is not just to Burisma and to Biden's son, money funneling to America, and that this guy Lutsenko is saying there's much to be investigated. Where was this money going? Who in America was getting it? And many people are starting to ask the question, why in the world doesn't Lindsey Graham, why doesn't he want to get to the bottom of the Ukrainian mess? In fact, Lindsey Graham was quoted. He took a shot at President Trump and basically just said, hey, you know what? He said, this is Lindsey Graham's quote about Trump. If the Senate's ready to vote and ready to acquit you, you should celebrate. Like, stop telling us we should get to the bottom of all this Ukraine stuff. If we're going to acquit you, that's enough for you. I don't know. So this is where Lindsey Graham is raising many people's suspicion. Number one, is he among those who may have been receiving money from the Ukraine? I do not know, but he is behaving oddly. And number two is, what red-blooded patriot American would not want to know all about the Ukrainian collusion, corruption with the Democrat Party, with Hillary Clinton, all happening with Biden and Burisma and Hunter Biden? Why wouldn't the Senate want to get to the bottom of it? I'll leave that question in your thought and turn now to why the stories we talked about today matter to you. First, I will tell you, we talked about the story of the Blockbuster jobs report. Outside the Beltway, America is thriving. The jobs unemployment numbers are staggeringly good, historic for all Americans without regard to gender, skin color, or ethnicity. These economic results are not an accident. They're not happenstance. Trump's tax reform created the right incentives in a free economy. Trump's trade realignments have promoted America first in manufacturing and energy and other sectors, which have been beaten down for decades and are finally coming back to life. Objectively, President Trump is demonstrating competence and the virtues of free markets on a level not seen in decades. Next, on Pensacola, precious patriotic blood was shed on Pensacola Naval Base because we will not connect the dots between jihadist violence and core Islamic teaching that justifies that violence. We should not assume the goodwill of every Saudi military member. Pending thorough review and examination, we should shut down the training of all non-American military on military bases in the U.S., revoke visas of every Saudi national in America for military training of any kind. Americans must wake up. Individual Muslims from Islamic majority countries may or may not be a threat, but denying, ignoring, or wishing away the facts about what they do learn will not generate a solution. And the the Horowitz report, still being reviewed, digested, but early observations is an inspector's report, not a prosecutor's. Bar Durham still to come. This inspector, and I think it's a mistake of Michael Horowitz, has an institution preserver mindset. He understates findings and conclusions to soften a reaction. The stench of willful FISA abuse by senior FBI DOJ officials is rife in this report. FBI Director Wray wants to retrain everybody for the future of FISA. And you know what? Accountability for the abuses of the past, it still must come. And on the Horowitz report, this is a statement from Attorney General Barr. And you know what? I'm going to let you read it. You can grab it in a screen grab. It's a little bit long for today, but he basically ends up saying, we have to get to the bottom of what happened. Within the whole lead up to the FBI thing, but he also ends up saying the malfeasance and misfeasance detailed in the Inspector General's report reflects a clear abuse of the FISA process. And then Ted Cruz and Chuck Todd, hysterical, combative Chuck Todd embodies a ruling class mainstream media utterly blind to truth. Ted Cruz points out the obvious. U.S. government corruption in the Ukraine under Obama and Biden is an important American interest. It's an appropriate subject of investigation. It is what a new president ought to care about, given the growing body of evidence. But beware, there is a little whiff of uniparty, meaning Democrat and Republican corruption involving the Ukraine before and after the 2016 election. The corruption is so vast as to possibly motivate the U.S. Senate, possibly under Judiciary Chairman Lindsey Graham, to shut down an impeachment trial just to cover up the evidence. Americans must not let them get away with this. Drain the swamp. And that, my friends, is America Can We Talk for today. I want to make one little pitch for you. I send out a weekly email on Fridays. It links to the stories of the week with hyperlinks. It goes on Friday. It covers the previous week's shows. If you're listening to this on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, on any podcast, you can sign up for that newsletter by going to americacanwetalk.org and hit subscribe. There's no charge. You get the once weekly new email newsletter. I never share emails. It's a great way both to catch up on the show, and it's a great way to share the show. And I'm urging and inviting and encouraging you to please share the show with your friends. It's important that this show stays strong and grows in 2020, because it is a year when the very culture of America is really on the ballot. The future of freedom, the future of this precious country on the ballot this year. And I loved your help in spreading what you learn on the show. So this is America Can We Talk. I'm Debbie Georgatos. Tune in every Monday through Thursday, 3 p.m. Central Time, where we always talk truth about America, because America matters. I'll talk to you next time.
Like a crashing wave. Can you hear us now?
America Can We Talk? Truth about America.